much more soil saving. He was very, very concerned about how we were losing soil, not only in the United States, but all around the world. And so we got interested in his idea of chestnuts because they were so versatile in terms of how they could be used for human as well as animal feed. And well, I don't need to read this to you. I will say that we were lucky enough to actually visit China in 1980 and stood on the Great Wall. And I do remember scrubby looking ground there. Some years later, a fellow chestnut grower visited China as part of a chestnut program. And they had, in fact, planted chestnut trees all around the Great Wall of China. And so they were on the road to recovery of putting those hillsides back into production. So, chestnuts. I'm going to advance this.
Arrows aren't working.
The arrows are.
We had to take that out. We don't have enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Except I hit unmute, so now I've made it now that I've addressed it.
You've got to make sure you're back in PowerPoint.
There we go.
Okay, all right. All right, so there are multiple varieties of chestnuts around the world, and I wanted to just briefly give you that overview. Castanea is their Latin name, but Castanea sativa is the European chestnut. And you see me sitting here at the base of one of the European chestnuts in northern Italy, and you see how massive that tree is. And this little sign that was posted there, we were in an area where the chestnuts had been planted, sorry about that feedback. Chestnuts had been planted by decree by one of the monarchs. And you could tell that, yeah, you can, I know, but we'll see if it picks it up. Can you hear me now? That's okay. All right. When the chestnut leaves had fallen, and we were there at the end of the season, you could tell that this whole entire mountainside was planted in a grid. This was not a random forest of chestnut trees. It was a decreed spacing. And this was done, this one tree that they had taken a core sample of had been planted in 1675. Chestnut trees literally do live for thousands of years. They were spread in Europe by the Romans. The Roman army knew that they needed the food and they needed the wood. Chestnuts coppice very well. In other words, if you cut the tree down, they grow back from the roots readily. So the Roman army basically spread chestnuts through the entire Roman Empire, which is really interesting. And when you can see the spread, they've done pollen counts of chestnut pollen as they go all the way up into Great Britain when the Romans were marching through Gaul and Germany and so on. So they were not only valued for their food and for the wood, but chestnuts, think about it during Roman times. Sugar was known in Europe, but it was not cultivated or widely distributed in Europe. And if you look back at the history of sugar, sugar was like gold. It was only for royalty, and it was very, very rarely obtained. So the sweetest things that the Europeans would have known would have been honey, or fruit, or chestnuts. And chestnuts, if you let a chestnut dry down and you grind it into flour, you can make a cake that requires absolutely no sugar. And it is so sweet. So chestnuts were really valuable for that. I also put this up. This was a botanical from monks. I don't know what you call it, a physician's diary from the 1100s, and they were talking about chestnuts and what they're valuable for. And I might be kind of hard to read. They're best when used very ripe. The beneficial is they stimulate intercourse and are very nourishing. And the detrimental is they can cause flatulence. So anyway, that was the European thing. And chestnuts are still in the European culture. They're in the European culture, they're in the Asian culture. And we were lucky enough to have a crop failure in 2005. So we went to the Mecca of chestnuts, to Italy, for all the chestnut festivals. And what struck me, and this is why I love this photo, was everywhere we went. I mean, think about going down Massachusetts Street and every storefront had chestnuts in it. So whether they were selling dishes or tea or cameras or jewelry, they had chestnuts in the store display. Dr. Scholl's had chestnuts in the store display. You know, this, whatever this thing is, this juicer had chestnuts in the store display. And oh, I love this one, the drugstore, chestnuts in the store display. So this is all to say, one of the points I like to make, and we'll talk about it a little later too, is chestnuts are best in October and November. They are not best roasting over the open fire in Christmas. We'll go through that. Okay, so that's sativa. The Castanea dentata is the American chestnut. And these are pictures of the American chestnut, which they said was as big or larger than our American redwood pre-1905. In 1905, the New York Botanical Garden imported chestnuts from China or Japan, they're not really sure which, to improve the size of the American chestnut. The American chestnut nut was very tiny, and they recognized the value of the food and the wood, and there are all through the East still chestnuts, chestnut wood that are in railroad ties and fence lines and floors, and it's incredibly rot resistant, but they wanted a bigger nut. So they imported this to crossbreed it. Well, predictably, they brought in the chestnut blight. And within 50 years, the American chestnut was virtually wiped off. This was the range of the American chestnut. It was huge. And at that time, because of the size and its ability to seed prolifically and as I said, sprout from the roots, it was the dominant tree in the East, and then it wasn't. But you can see from this picture, it is a tiny nut. And you go back, I'm a member of the board of the Northern Nut Growers Association. Don't laugh at the name. Everybody always laughs at the name. Anyway, the Northern Nut Growers were founded in 1910, and one of the organization's projects was to try to stop the blight. And they tried basically fire lines, cutting down trees, to create breaks, but nothing worked. And so to this day, we are still trying to restore the American chestnut. The American Chestnut Foundation has for years had a crossbreeding program where they would try to breed into the American chestnut the blight resistance, which the Chinese chestnuts have. And then more recently, within the last 10 years, there has been GMO work done by SUNY, State University of New York, in Syracuse, where they've discovered if they insert a gene from wheat, which causes the wheat to be resistant to this kind of blight, the XOX gene, that they can breed in blight resistance to the American chestnut. As you might not be surprised, it's a little controversial. And the FDA is on the verge, nonetheless, of approving this GMO tree. They had a little hiccup because of a misnaming of some of the stock, but it looks like it's going to go forward. And they say they've done all the testing they need to do, that it's not going to hurt the butterflies or the squirrels or any other of the forest masting properties, and it would enable us to bring back the American chestnut.
They want to have the same small nut.
Yes. We were actually, the Northern Nut Growers had our meeting up in Syracuse, New York, this summer. And so we were able to see some of their test plots. And it was early August, so the trees had set on the burrs, but you could tell that the burrs were very tiny, so there wasn't going to be much of a nut inside. So, okay, what is a chestnut not? This is, it is amazing. I went to Trader Joe's one time and found a bag of frozen culinary chestnuts that had a picture of horse chestnuts on the front. It's astounding how often that is confused. This tree, this picture here, was taken in front of our own Carnegie Library on 9th Street. There is a beautiful horse chestnut there. The horse chestnut, you can see that it's got that basal scar at the end, which looks very much like a culinary chestnut, but the other end is smooth. There is no blossom or tassel on it, and the burrs and the flowers are completely different. And these are also poisonous. So don't go pick those up and eat them, okay? Leave them to the horses. Yeah. Oh, they didn't. They were selling culinary chestnuts. They just put the wrong picture on it. You know, they had some 20-something graphics art lady or man who just didn't know. Yeah, I mean, and if you Google chestnuts on the internet, they're often mixed. I don't think horses eat them, but animals do. I mean, maybe horses eat them. And you will find some extracts that, you know, what is it when you give somebody just a little bit of something? Yeah. Homeopathic, that's the word I was thinking of. Yeah. I've never eaten one.
It's poisonous to squirrels, and if so, can I
Get some? I know, really. So, yeah. As an aside, we had a graphic artist at the Nut Growers Association try to design a new logo for us. And this person got up there and he actually had a squirrel in the new logo. And all these nut growers are going, really?
Is the horse chestnut the native tree in America?
Yes. Yeah. And you'll see that, you know, that old song, April in Paris, Chestnuts in Blossom. Yeah. You see them all over Europe. They're a lot of times they call them plain trees. And that is this breed. Culinary chestnuts or Chinese chestnuts don't bloom until June. So another misleading song. Sorry.
No, oh, sorry.
Okay, so this is what a real chestnut, a culinary chestnut looks like. And that's Chestnut Charlie there, examining this year's crop. with the typical 3 chestnuts in a burr. And I brought some the harvest is over, the chestnuts are all dried up. But you guys can pass this around and don't touch the burrs because they're very sharp. If you want to get a closer look at what they look like. And then those are the chestnut blossoms that come out in June. The blossoms are extremely fragrant or stinky, depending on how you. But literally, when we're right off the 59 highway on the way to Midland Junction. And if you drive by and have your window cracked just a little bit in June, you will, I mean, it's just a little bit overwhelming. Charlie and I have been out for walks. And just this spring, we were right at the corner of 19th and Vermont. Yeah, that's where the school is. And I'm like, there's a chestnut around here. And it was that little taekwondo school. And the guy there had planted a couple of chestnut trees in the back, probably from nuts he bought from us. Okay, so we're going to bring it down a little bit now and just talk about Chestnut Charlie's. So we purchased this 20 acres of bottomland in 1991. It was, we were living overseas. We kept up with the farmer who was farming, you know, the normal rotation there. But we had found on a trip back the property for sale, and Charlie's father was like, oh, bottomland, you can do anything with bottomland. And to have the opportunity to get just 20 acres was just pretty exciting to us. So anyway, so we bought the property in 1991. For family reasons, we came back in 1995 and Charlie started planning. He had gotten really interested, as I said, from the J. Russell Smith, plus some National Geographic articles about chestnuts. And he being a former lawyer and me being an accountant, we didn't know anything about what kind of trouble we were getting into. We just said, sure, plant a tree, pick up the stuff after, you know, how hard could that be? Anyway, so this is the way it looked in 2006. There's our little trees. We had interplanted Christmas trees as what we called our short-term crop, which again, we didn't know really what we were doing, but as it turned out was a very serendipitous choice to make, because the Christmas tree needles are actually very beneficial as a growing acidification of the soil to help out the chestnuts. Anyway, so we had Christmas trees. You can see that it's getting bigger, greening up. This is one picture we like to show to talk about, again, the value of tree crops. So this was in May. Everything around us, corn and soybeans, is brown and not doing a darn thing for the environment. But we're still creating oxygen, still. And this will be true, you know, the corn, you know, how it's this big in June or whatever. Short-term crop, it's gone, and then it's all brown again, and our trees are still green and still doing their thing. It's very obvious from these aerial photos. So this is what they look like now on the ground. As you can tell, we grow Chinese chestnuts, the Castanea mollissima. The Chinese probably had 5,000 years to cultivate chestnuts, and they cultivated them for food. So the chestnuts are sweet, they're easy to peel. The trees are much, much shorter, less massive than the European or the American. And they really just want to be bushes. They're harder than heck to keep trimmed up above the tractor. But anyway, so that's where we're at now. So I kind of wanted to show you how they have produced over the years. This only goes to 2015, our 21st growing season. But you can see we just, people always say, oh, when did you get your first chestnut? And how long did it take to, if you're a tree grower, a chestnut grower, or a nut grower of any sort, you have to have a lot of patience and another income. So it was 13 growing seasons before we had any appreciable harvest. But then, you know, then they took off. Not only in the total crop, but in the size. You see this turquoise is what we call our large size, which is the chestnuts that we sell to Whole Foods. They scoop all those up. Yeah, okay. Rainfall. So I thought this was interesting. So you see there in 2005, when we had 27 degrees the first week of May, and it stayed that way for about 4 days. And all of the spring growth on the tree just was gone. And so that was the year we went to Italy, because we didn't have any chestnuts to pick up. But the rainfall, you can see on this last, from the 18th growing season through the 21st, now whether the rainfall had anything to do with the increase of production, I think it did. That also the age of the trees would have had something to, you know, as they grow older, they become more productive up to about 25 years, and then they just kind of moderate from there. So that's kind of what you're looking at in terms of how long it takes to get some nuts. So this was what I pulled off of Google Maps yesterday. Now, I don't know when was the last time they updated it, but I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the challenges of growing chestnuts. So if you remember back to that 2015, where it was all green and filled in and there's no spaces, now we have other issues. The area that's circled in red, where you see the bald spots, we've had flooding in North Lawrence. And chestnuts do not like their feet wet. We have some pecan trees in the orchard. The pecans have done fine in some of these low areas, but the chestnuts just give up. They just die. And so we have chestnut stumps, you know, maybe that big around, 20-year-old trees that just said, that's it, we're done. The area circled in yellow is something that's new to us and is spreading across the United States. One of the things that we had always felt lucky about, and we do still feel lucky about, is that we are pretty far removed from the natural chestnut growing area. And that has isolated us from a lot of the issues that chestnuts might have. But this is called oak wilt, and it is a real problem with oaks. They're having a huge problem apparently in Texas with oak wilt just wiping out the live oaks down there. But oak wilt affects chestnuts. And what happens is it's in mature orchards where the initial contact will come from a wound in the tree. Some bug that's visited a red oak comes to the wound in the chestnut, transmits the virus in effect, but then from there it spreads through the orchard through root grafts. So, you know, as trees mature, their roots literally graft to one another where they touch, and that's what spreads. And so we lost another big chunk of very productive trees to oak wilt. Now Charlie has there's no cure. The preventative is trenching, cutting all those root grafts. So we have what looks like giant mole trails around that area, trying to keep it from spreading. So it is still, we said it was an experiment, and it's still an experiment. So growing conditions for Chinese chestnuts. The soil should be slightly acidic. As you can see, they will tolerate pretty extreme temperatures, but as you well know, what happens in Kansas is, or all over the Midwest, right? You get these swings, right? They come out of dormancy in January, because it got up to 60, and then we get more freezes. And so they say, don't plant in a frost pocket. Get good air drainage. And they are very drought tolerant. We have very bad water in our well. It's full of iron, and every irrigation system that we tried to set up, especially when the chestnuts were young, just got clogged up with all these minerals. So we really don't have a irrigation system. So the accountant and the lawyer planted in neutral soils in a frost pocket.
Oh, great.
We did not go to the chestnut growers or the northern nut growers until afterwards. So unlike you guys who train people and this is what we need to do, they do too. But we just didn't seek out any advice until we'd already planted. And so we're still trying to grow where we were planted. Another issue that you have, which is still under research, they've never really figured it out. We've grafted all of our walnuts, we've grafted our pecans. Of course, all apple trees are grafted. And we grafted a number of the chestnuts, but after 13 years, or what is that? Another 13-year graft, you start to get a graft failure. Not in all of them, but in some of them, and they can't really figure out why. There is some thought that if you take the nut from the mother tree and use that as the root stock, and the scion wood from the same tree, and you graft those together, that you will have fewer problems with graft union failure, but not perfect. So what's amazing is this Swago is still producing, and that scar is growing and growing. It's getting uglier and uglier, but I don't know, it still puts out trees. But eventually, I mean, nuts, but eventually they will completely just cut off the graft and start sprouting from the roots. So that's one of our issues. The other issue is blight. So this is what blight looks like. The spores will start to get in and start cracking and ruin the vascular system of the tree. Chinese chestnuts are blight resistant, and so they have the ability to start covering over those scars and regrowing. And that's where the American chestnut did not. But occasionally we'll see graft in our orchard. Blight in our orchard. And these are examples of that, but it's not really too much of a problem for us. The other thing I wanted to show you, because people do come to you for advice, lots of people ask us, oh, I want to plant some chestnut trees for the deer. And we try to tell them that these Chinese chestnuts are an orchard tree. They are not a wild tree. And everything in Kansas will outgrow the Chinese chestnut. Even Johnson grass will outgrow. But walnuts, wild walnuts, elm, mulberry, you name it, it'll grow faster than the Chinese chestnut. And so they get overshaded, and so they never really thrive in a forest kind of environment. And so we always try to explain that to people that want to feed chestnuts to deer. But you can see that. So yeah, Charlie planted some black walnuts. The chestnuts there, the walnuts are already starting to overtop that chestnut, and they're going, where's the sun? Where's the sun? Does this look familiar? So they cause us problems. They weaken the trees. They don't kill them. But I like to explain to people that the trees are like a bank, and you can withdraw. You can, oh, I'm not going to give you any water. Oh, I'm going to cut off a lot of your leaves by eating them up. Oh, I'm going to give you a frost. And eventually the trees will just like, really, I can't make any more nuts. You've just withdrawn too much. So the Japanese beetles, we don't do anything about them. We're organic. We don't spray, but they don't help the trees. Let me put it that way. Here's our biggest fear, the chestnut weevil. So a lot of times you will hear people say, oh, I got chestnuts and they were all wormy. Well, what they got was the chestnut weevil. So, and I failed to get a picture, but the female is, I don't know, a fly looking thing about this big that's got a proboscis. And she will sit on top of the chestnut burr and plant her eggs into the chestnut while they are developing. And then, the grubs come out. They start doing this to the nut. They get all fat and happy. And then they go into the ground to overwinter 1 or 2 seasons and then reemerge as a female or as a adult chestnut weevil. So our practice is, again, we don't spray. What we are able to do is what we call a clean harvest. So we ask our harvesters, pick up everything. We don't want any chestnut material left on the ground. And we throw burrs early in the season into bins that have metal bottoms, and anything else will end up either in our cooler. So if there was a weevil in there, it would just end up in the cooler, or fed to somebody's pigs or sheep. Everything wants to eat chestnuts. So this lower picture is just a picture of mice, squirrels, deer, raccoons, blue jays. Everything wants to eat chestnuts. They're sweet. They're good to them. So those are our challenges. All right. People always say, well, so what's good about chestnuts? The first thing is they're misnamed really as a nut. They don't have the kind of fat content that a walnut or a pecan would have. You can see on that bottom 0.6 grams of fat compared to peanuts, which are 14 grams. And they're just, so if you grind up any of those other nuts, macadamias, hazels, almonds, you get butter, some sort of a nut butter. If you grind up a chestnut, you get flour. You don't get creamy butter. The chestnuts have protein, which is a little unusual, and it's also a complete protein. And they also have vitamin C, which is very unusual for a nut. So they're very nutritious. And stories that we heard in Italy when we made that visit was the older generation was kind of tired of chestnuts because that's what they lived on during the war. When all the crops were ruined or they were too, unsafe to go out and harvest, they could go into the mountains and eat chestnuts. And that was in essence a full, it was like getting your rice and your beans, that was good nutrition for them, but they were kind of tired of it. All right, how to fix chestnuts. They are fresh and they must be refrigerated. And so once we pick chestnuts up from the ground, we wash them and size them and get them into the cooler as quickly as we can. And we keep the cooler at right about 32 degrees. We pump in extra humidity. That's how they like to live. They can be eaten raw, but they're much tastier when they're roasted. They have an inner skin we call a pellicle. And the challenge of that is getting that pellicle to pop off the nut. And so that's one of the reasons they're not really all that great when they're raw. But any sort of heat, microwave, stove, roasted, boiling, will pop that pellicle, and then you can easily peel them. If you look up recipes, you will still see people recommending the X. You have to score them, otherwise they'll blow up. There's so much water in them that if you put, I don't know. What time? 11 is when you, okay, all right, sorry. I'm going to try to make this really quick. I was doing a cooking demonstration at the demonstration kitchen at Whole Foods in the store, which is no longer there. But you know, one of those big fancy ones with the lights and the mirrors and all this sort of stuff. And I'm a little nervous, and I'm scoring the chestnuts and putting them aside, and then I'm explaining to people all about the chestnuts, and then I have a hot oven behind me, and I reach over and I put my tray of chestnuts in there, and I'm continuing to talk, and then suddenly I hear, and I went, oh no, I put in the unscored nuts. And I knew what was happening, and so I grabbed a tea towel and turned around to the oven, and I'm trying to open the oven door. Honestly, nuts were flying out. They were just exploding. That's what they do. And then I spent about 2 hours trying to clean off dried up chestnut from inside the oven. Anyway, yes, you have to score them, otherwise they blow up. But I say don't put the X, which you'll see in a lot of recipes. Do a slice like you see in that top picture, and they're way easier to peel that way. And sorry. Oh, I turned it off. Thank you. Yes. Yeah, they're ready to go. They're ready to go. Anyway, they're best and fresh in October. And so what I tell people, because I get the question I probably get the most is, how long will these keep? And so the first thing I usually say is just eat them. Don't store them. But everybody wants to store them. They want them for Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever. What I always say, the best thing, if you're going to use it in a recipe, get them peeled, put them in your freezer, and then they're all ready to go. And there's not going to be any issues with them drying up or getting moldy. But eat them. That's the thing. So the curse of the Christmas song. That's what I call it. In, I don't know, 2000, I think it was, maybe later. The LA Times did a story about chestnuts, and they actually came to Lawrence and interviewed Charlie, but a lot of other people about chestnuts as well. But this was a paragraph out of their story that she went to find Mel Torme's family. And they said, as it turns out, he was not a fan of chestnuts. He never shared them with his kids. And he just thought it sounded good in a song. You know, and this is what we've been living with ever since.
Before you advance, you say freeze well using the recipe. Is that after or before?
It's after, but when I do it, I just get it hot enough to peel so that they're still firm. I don't get them mushy. And then you can finish cooking them for your soup or your stuffing or whatever you want to do. Okay.
So when you're slicing that across, you need a very sharp knife, right?
Yes. I'm still hooked up. Let me show you what we use. So we have a dollar store near us at the orchard. And Charlie went on creating the perfect chestnut knife. And he bought the dollar store out of cheap steak knives. Then he snapped it. And what you've got is a full handle, a little bit of serration, so it bites into the nut. And yeah, it's a safe, and it's pretty cheap. And then they got some more, and then he bought them out again. So I'm suspecting that the people at Dollar were like, oh, what's going on in North Lawrence? Yeah, so
Kansas is not a natural, not a natural location.
not at all.
So how did we get out in your creek?
We don't have it.
Oh, I think you,
No, we do not have chestnut weevils.
okay.
We have, and our inspectors, you'll find sometimes a little hole. We have codling moths that will crawl in, but we've never actually found a chestnut weevil. So far, we've managed to stay, free of that. Yeah.
And I well, the chestnut,
Mm-hmm.
it's the inner skin. It'll be in a paper brown skin that takes up.
Yep. And are you peeling them while they're hot?
Dry up. In boiling water
Yeah. Yeah.
and leave them in the water, take them out a couple of minutes.
A couple at a time, yeah. I mean, that's the way I do it. If they're hot enough, that should peel off. Depending on where you get your chestnuts. So another reason I really like Chinese chestnuts, the European chestnuts, when you open them up, they look sort of like a brain. You know how they have really deep fissures in them, and that pellicle will actually go into it, and it really does make it a lot more difficult to peel. And the West Coast, California, Washington, and Oregon, have managed to stay blight free. And they grow European Japanese cultivar that it grows great big nuts, but it has all those fissures. And I'm always going, just get Chinese chestnuts are a little smaller, but you know, they peel pretty easy.
I usually roast them
Mm-hmm,
and then peel them.
mm-hmm.
I can't peel them fast enough before they cool off. And
Yep.
then, I mean, I get blisters on my.
Yeah,
palms.
yeah.
Should I be boiling them instead of?
You know, I prefer roasting over boiling. I mean, it's just like anything, you know, you're concentrating the flavors when you roast. So what we do, we usually roast them in just a Dutch oven or, you know, cast iron. And we'll turn the oven off, but actually leave them in there and just take out a few at a time. So you do have to have asbestos fingers. One of the things, we can throw them into an old tea towel and kind of rub it, and that will break off a lot of the skin. And then you just have to kind of finish them off. But yeah, I cannot believe I forgot my bags. 375. So what I do is I like to have my oven hot and my cast iron hot before I put the chestnuts in. And that allows me to get the pellicle popped without, you know, that slow sort of warm up. And I think it makes the chestnuts better. Yeah, Georgiana. Ah, good question. Heavy leather gloves. We used to tell people who were harvesting for us, oh, bring your gloves. And they bring up these little cotton gardening gloves. No, so we issue gloves to everybody now. For the most part, the nuts will fall free. But there are some that have to be urged out of their burrs. And the other thing some people do is they just open the burr. There's a burr on the ground, and they'll just spread it with their feet, and the nuts will pop. Sorry, somebody else.
I just
Oh.
have, because I've always roasted them. So
Mhm.
if you bake them, how long?
You know, there's never any easy answers, right? So first of all, it depends on the size, and these are smalls. I wanted them to cook fast. So smalls will cook faster than jumbos. It's also on how old they are, because chestnuts lose weight because they're constantly transpiring. And so as all that water is leaving, then they will cook down faster, and it's easy to turn chestnuts into little rocks. In which case then they are recoverable. It's just like a dried bean. You just put it in water and let it reconstitute. But yeah, so usually I say 15 to 20 minutes. But, yeah, Georgia. Yep. Sorry. They are at the Merc, they are at Checkers, and we'll have our farm store open this weekend, 11 to 2. Not very long. Yeah. So for anybody, now I have let these cool off a little bit, so hopefully they'll feel well enough. Anybody that wants to try it, and I did not cook them very long. So this I call the Martha Stewart method, because actually it was a Martha Stewart living where I first discovered, oh, just do a slice. Don't do that silly X. So it all comes off. Yeah, see the pellicle stuck just a little bit because they're starting to cool down. They're very dry. I'm not going to pop this in my mouth right now. Chestnuts are best with a cup of coffee or a glass of port. That's even better. That is even better. But because they are so dry, it is nice to have some moisture while you're eating them. They're grainy. For anybody who hasn't had a chestnut, really don't prepare your mouth for a pecan. It's going to be grainy, soft, sort of squashy. Actually, somebody told me one time, I think chestnuts taste like Thanksgiving. Because some people say they're meaty, some people say they're squashy, some people say, oh, it's like a little sweet potato. Yeah. Any other questions? Good. You guys are great. Thank you.